Hi patrons, welcome back to a new tutorial series. For this series we're going to work on this robin. As you can see, I've already drawn mine out, and if you want to draw yours out using a grid system then you can follow the tutorials for that. I'll post them in the video description and onto the post on Patreon as well for you. I've also supplied a line drawing for this one, so if you don't fancy drawing out your own line using a grid method using the tutorials, then you can just copy down the outline which I have provided for you guys. The outline I provided is an exact scan of this, so it'll be completely accurate to my drawing here. I'm also going to be working to a limited colour palette for this one. I have a limited number of 15 pencils, so these will be the pencils that I'll be sticking with throughout the whole of this entire drawing series, so you won't have to purchase any additional colours, and I won't be using any additional ones as well. We'll be trying to tackle blending and mixing colours just using this set. So the colours that I'm going to use are dark sepia, walnut brown, brown ochre, warm grey 1, cold grey 1, cold grey 3 and light yellow ochre. Those ones are all polychromos pencils. Burnt ochre and raw sienna are luminance. Burnt sienna is a polychromos pencil, but you can use the luminance one as well, it's exactly the same colour. Orange and white are luminance pencils. Then you have earth green, which is a polychromos, moss green, which is a luminance, and finally nougat, which is a polychromos colours. If you would like any other suggestions to variations in different pencil sets, then pop a comment below and I'll try and find out which sort of colours would be appropriate and a near match for your specific colour pencil set. So for instance, if you're using Prismacolors, I'll try and find which Prismacolors match these ones. I'll also make sure that I list these in the description of this video for you, and I'll make sure that I reference this video in the other parts so that you can reference it back in case you've lost your colour pencil list. But I would suggest writing down your colours like I've done here on this little piece of paper. It's exactly the same paper, well actually it's not the same paper. It's Fabriano paper which I've used for this, but my actual drawing is going to be on the Strathmore Bristol Border 500 plate paper, because I'd like to do a paper review for this for YouTube, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to complete a drawing on this paper and review it. So that's my drawing paper, and of course I'm using my Cume pencil sharpener, and I'm also using just an ordinary eraser, my Caran d'Ache triangular one, which is a bit more of a circle now. I'm also going to use the Tombow Mono Zero eraser with the round tip as well. So in this first part we're just going to make a start, make a crack on the robin and see where we get to. So make sure that you have your reference photo up and that it's large enough for you to see anything that you need to. We're going to start with the eye and then work towards the beak. So for the eye, it's a nice dark beady eye, so you want a nice sharp dark pencil. So for this we're going to use our dark sepia pencil. You need to make sure that it's really nice and sharp, so if it's not, give it a quick sharpen. I'm just sharpening mine up real quick. Want a nice super sharp point so that you can get a nice crisp edge around here. So I'm also going to use my little colour swatch for something to lean on so that I don't keep rubbing the paper, because my graphite line might decide to disappear on me. So what I'm going to do is just gently outline the eye. I'm not erasing any graphite for this because my graphite line is actually quite light, and the colours that I'm going to add over this section are going to meld into that outline anyway. So straight away what we're going to do is go straight into shading. This whole eye we're just going to add a layer of the dark sepia all over. I'm using small circular motions for this. And what we're doing is making sure that we leave the highlight of the eye, so that really bright sort of rectangular shaped highlight, we're making sure that we leave that free of any colour pencil. So once you've got the overall shape and you're happy that you've filled the area of the paper with one layer of dark sepia, then you can go ahead and add a second layer, again making sure you use smooth circular motions. That way you make sure that you get into all of the tooth of the paper, and make sure that you use a light hand again as well. You don't want to use a heavy hand and do heavy layers, just in case you make a mistake and you want to erase it. It's always good to just use the light layers. So small circular motions, and as we come up to this highlight area, we're going to try and shorten it and shape it so that it is exactly what we're seeing on the reference photo. So there's a little line straight down the middle of this highlight, where obviously something is reflected in the eye. So we're just adding that in, just very gently, just stroking the paper with your pencil very, very lightly to add that little line in the top there. So to tone that highlight, what we're going to use is the Cold Grey 3. Again, I've got a nice sharp point. I'm just going to lightly add a little bit of colour in there just to tone it down a little bit, give it a little bit of a cold sort of bluey hint. And then if you need to brighten it up, what you can do is use your Luminance white pencil, just add the whitest part back in there. Like so, and that is pretty much its eye complete. It's pretty simple for bird's eyes, they're just little black beady dots. So now we're going to do some of the feathers around the eye. Obviously they are different colours. So we've got nice yellow outline around the very outer edge of the eye. So for our base layer, what we're going to use is the warm grey one. We're going to make sure that we sharpen this up so it's quite sharp as well. So once you've got a nice sharp pencil, what we're going to do is just add a very, very light layer of the warm grey one around the outside of the eye. And where you've got this line which denotes where the orange stops and the brown starts, we're going to go all the way up to that and over it. So we're going over it so that we can blend the orange out a little bit and blend the brown in. So what we're doing is we're following the shape of the feathers and the direction of the feathers, so they sort of span out from around the eye, and then as you come towards the cheek of the bird, you're obviously coming down this way, and then at the top of the eye you're coming up towards the top of the head. So just adding a very, very light layer, just using some shading, going back and forth, following the direction of those feathers. So we're just going to fill in a small patch like this to start with. Going to go up to the edge of the beak as well. Just remember to drag that warm grey 1 pencil into the brown section, so over that graphite line. In case you're wondering what sort of size I'm working on, I've popped that in the description for you guys, and I've also popped the paper and everything else that I may want throughout this for you as well. So we're getting a nice base layer here. I'm going to go down a little bit further. I want to get a nice orange section filled in. Again, making sure that I go over the line, the graphite line where the orange stops. So once we've got a nice sort of coverage, put a couple of inches of base layer down. You want nice, smooth, even base layer here. So once we've got that down, then we can start to add some of the colours into the bird. So as we don't have a very light yellow to go around this right hand edge of the eye, what we're going to use is the light yellow ochre, and then we're going to tone it down with a little bit of the white. So we're going to add the white over the top of this. So what you want to do is you want to make sure your pencil's sharp, and you just want to add a tiny little layer around the eye. You can go all the way around the eye if you want to. So what I'm going to do, because we're going to be adding some orange colours over the left hand side anyway, yellow is always a nice undertone to have under orange. Just make sure that you use a very, very light pencil, because you don't want to go in too heavy and too dark with this colour, because obviously it's a really light yellow. So make sure you use a very light hand. So you can see it's slightly yellow there. So what we're going to do is just bring this yellow down a little bit as well. So underneath the eye we're going to bring this down. And around to the side. And then what we're going to do, where the yellow is the lightest, so on this right hand side of the eye, we're going to add some white down. So when you're adding this white, make sure that it's nice and sharp. So I've got quite a sharp white pencil here, and you want to kind of push quite hard to get a nice layer of the white over the top, so it goes really, really pale. So you just want to apply this to the right hand side of the eye. You don't want to add this to any other part of the eye just yet. And you get a nice pale yellow. So what we're going to do now is just go in with a second layer of the yellow to define the darker areas. So on the left hand side of the eye, where you've got this orange area, we're just going to go over with a second layer, again keeping it nice and light. And then around the bottom of the eye, what I've done is left a halo of lighter colour around the bottom. So I've just sort of avoided doing that very, very yellow part next to the eye, and I've just come down a little bit and just shaded a second layer down here. So you want to look at your reference photo and see where you've got the darker feathers, the darker orange feathers sitting underneath the eye, and just follow the curvature of them round. Follow them in the direction that they're going. And we want to do the same around, coming up to the top as well. So at the moment we're just keeping our strokes nice and smooth. We're keeping a shading motion going. So you can see that the tone we're building up, as we're building up the layers of the yellow, it's turning quite nice and orangey. I don't know if that's really coming through very well. But that's the kind of tone that we want to build up to layer our orange on top. So what we're going to do is lightly bring this yellow pencil over the graphite line and into the brown area ever so slightly, just so that we can blend these two areas together. And now what we're going to do, now that we've got this sort of really white, light yellow part depicted around the eye, we're going to then bring the yellow colour down over this entire area that we've shaded with the warm grey one. So again, you want to follow the feather direction. So you want to follow the feathers round. You'll notice that by using light layers that your paper looks quite grainy, but that's okay, because the more layers we add, that graininess will disappear. So nice and light layer, just adding this yellow all over, making sure that we bring the yellow over the graphite line. And into the grey and brown area, just a little bit, just so that we can blend it out real nice. So what we're going to do once we've added that layer all over, you can see that the nice yellow tone now. What we're going to do is add a secondary layer of the yellow to the areas where there are a lot darker. So you've got the dark orange. So we're going to add a second layer, again keeping nice and light like we did around the eye. And you want to add this in the areas where you can see that the feathers are darker. So you've got that darker orange tone of feather, this is where we're adding this. So what we're going to do is make sure that we keep a nice light hand, a nice sharp point onto the pencil. If you feel that your pencil needs sharpening, like mine does now, give it a little sharpen, it'll make all the difference. So continue to add your darker areas. It helps if you squint at your reference picture so that those darker areas jump out at you. You can see them a lot easier without any sort of background. So nice smooth strokes. If you want to go over a third time to really add the real darker areas in, you can do. Just be careful not to push too hard and remember to keep it nice and light so that everything can blend together real nice. So as you can see on my drawing, I now have some really nice dark yellow areas where we can tell where there's going to be some dark orange areas, which we're going to add in a minute, and then we can work on our midtones. So what we're going to do is pick out a darker colour. So what we're going to use is this burnt ochre from the Luminance. Give it a nice sharpen, get it nice and sharp. And then what we're going to do is add this into those darker areas. So we're going to go over those layers of the yellow with this colour. So again, we want to keep it nice and shaded marks for the meantime. So just lightly shade, use a very, very light pressure, don't push too hard. You'll find that you won't need to push too hard to get the right depth of colour anyway. Make sure that you use a very, very light hand, even pressure throughout your pencil. And just add this darker colour over these darker yellow areas. As you add more layers throughout your drawing, you'll see that the grain of the paper starts to disappear. And that's because obviously you're filling up the grain of the paper with more layers. Getting a nice build of colour, so your grain of the paper will eventually disappear. If it doesn't disappear, then you can just do a little burnishing or a little blending with whatever blending methods you wish. If you want to see some blending methods tutorial, then that is available to the $10 tier. So if you want to check that out, if you're on the $5 tier, you can subscribe up for just a day or two just so you can receive that video. So when it comes to adding these really dark parts around the eye, what we're doing is using the point of the pencil, using a very light hand, we're just sort of mapping out where those dark parts and lines and everything are. And then what we're going to do to darken that up is use some dark sepia over the top so it gives a nice contrast and shadow. One thing I will add is when you're actually drawing your robin, you don't necessarily have to use the exact colours. The things that matter are getting the contrasts right, so getting your shadows and highlights in the right place, getting the variation between the lights and the darks correct. That's what makes something look realistic. It doesn't matter if you don't have an exact colour match, as long as you've got the lights and the darks in the right place, you've got them the right sort of vibrancy. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but make sure that you've got the right lights and darks. So obviously you want to make like the bit around the eye the lightest, and then this bit just above the eye to the left, you want to make that really quite dark. So as long as you've got those in, if you don't have an exact colour match, it doesn't particularly matter. It's the contrasts which make the portrait look realistic. So you could use completely odd colours. You could do it in a green, for instance, the breast. As long as you've got the contrast in the right place, it's going to look realistic. Obviously it's green, but it's the difference between the lights and the shadows and putting them in the right places, creating the contours and the curvatures and everything. That's what makes something look realistic. So you could be really, really great at drawing fur, but if you don't have the contrasts in the right place, if you don't have the shadows falling in the right area on the fur, then it's not going to look realistic, even though you might have a great technique for actually rendering the fur. So I'm just carefully adding in all of these darker areas, just using light layers, just building them up slowly. If anything needs a second or third layer just to darken up, then I'm just doing that and adding that with my pencil. So as you can see, I've just darkened up this very edge bit here because that's sort of popping out to me when I squint at my reference picture that is one of the darker areas. And you can see already that adding that kind of light halo around the eye has made it pop out. And then you've got these darker areas as well. So adding all that together is giving it a really nice realistic look already, and we've only got a few layers and a few colours in. So what we're going to do now is add some of the mid-tones. So we're going to use some of those colours, or the two colours, to add a variety of tones. So we're going to use the raw sienna and the orange from the Luminance. You can see that one is a slightly like yellower orange, that's the raw sienna, and then obviously the orange is a very nice vibrant orange colour. So we're going to use the lightest first, and again make sure you've got a nice sharp pencil, and all we're going to do is just keep shading, keep using that shading method. That's the perfect method for rendering the feathers at the moment. So you want to add this pretty much all over, apart from in your lightest areas. So if you've got any light areas that you think you want to keep free, then don't add this pencil to those areas. So we've got a nice tone going down now. I'm going to make sure that we add this above the eye as well. Don't forget to neglect that area, and blend it out ever so lightly into where the brown feathers are going to be at the top of the head. You want to make sure that you blend this over your darker areas as well, and that will just help to burnish and blend everything together. So to blend this out very lightly into the brown area, what I'm going to do is just use a few little lines just coming off of this. This will just help it blend really nice and smoothly and seamlessly. So I'm now going to switch to the orange. Again, make sure you've got a nice sharp pencil, so if you think it might need a little sharpen, if it's looking a little blunt, then just do that. And we're going to add this orange. This is a nice vibrant orange. You'll notice that the robin, it may be called Robin Redbreast, which is actually the title of my piece as well. But a majority of the colours throughout the robin's breast are actually orange, not red. So make sure that you glaze this, just lightly shade it. That's what I mean by glazing, lightly shade it over your darker areas. Again, if you've got any sort of lighter areas, keep those free of this colour. So now, dependent on your paper that you're using, as I'm using this different paper, I'm finding that it is a lot more grainy than the Fabriano. So what I'm going to do is actually do a little bit of blending, and I'm going to just do some blending with my white coloured pencil. So to blend, all I'm doing is just using small circular motions going over the area, just to blend the colours together, just try and get rid of some of that grain in the paper. So I don't know if this is coming through very easily or very well on screen, but you can tell that just by doing a little bit of blending with the white pencil, just very, very lightly, just doing small circular motions, has actually got rid of a lot of the grain of the paper. It's also muted my colours a little, but that's kind of good because I wanted a few lighter areas anyway. So what I can do now, as I've gone over very lightly with the white colour, what I can do is then glaze, just gently shade some of the raw sienna and the orange back over the top. Can also just use my darker orange colour just to add in those darker areas once more. And now everything's a lot smoother, so dependent on your paper you might not need to do that step. If there's no sort of paper grain showing through, then obviously you don't need to do any blending because it will be nice and smooth. But if you don't have a smooth area, just do some blending lightly with the white pencil. You really just want to add hardly any pressure, just blending and moving the white pencil over your work just to get a nice smooth finish. You don't want to push hard at all and burnish the paper because then you won't be able to add any layers back over the top. So just make sure that your pressure's nice and light. Use a nice light hand. So I'm quite happy with those lights and darks at the moment. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of a red hue, and to add a little bit of red, what I'm actually going to do is use some burnt sienna. So with this, I'm squinting up my reference photo and just depicting if there's any sort of lines where the feathers are overlapping ever so slightly. So what I'm doing with this layer is just doing some small lines back and forth, and then that will help depict some of the feathers. And again, I'm using the burnt sienna with a nice sharp point to add this dark ridge underneath the eye, to the side of it as well, just adding in all of these lines. This is where a polychromos pencil would come in a lot more useful than the luminance, because with the polychromos they're nice and hard, they're the oil-based pencils, so well, the harder oil-based pencil, because there's still a debate whether the luminants are actually oil or wax. So the polychromos have a harder lead than the luminants. So it's nice to use the polychromos to add in all of the fine details that require hard lead that doesn't break as easy. So we're just adding in some small details. What I'm going to do is add some of the darker areas. I did say I was going to use the dark sepia, but I think I'm going to use the walnut brown as it's less obtrusive, and just add this over those darkest areas underneath the eye here. I'm also going to just use this just to begin to shade some of the brown area. So just very, very lightly using this just to add in a very edge of where this brown area might sit or will sit against the robin, the orange. Again, using some lines just to try and add this in, just to feather it in and blend it in really nicely. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this first step so far. What I'm going to continue to do is just add some shading and some feather lines with the burnt sienna. So just adding some lines over the top of our drawing just helps to make it look a little bit like feathers. When you're drawing feathers, you want to do it in a little bit of a different manner to fur. So instead of doing strokes all over, what you're doing is sort of clumping them together and focusing on certain areas. So you're not going to add strokes all over, you just want to make little sections of them here and there. It just helps it look more like feathers rather than fur. You don't want to have a hairy looking bird, so don't add them all over, just add them here and there. The rest of the markings and the coat and the feathers are just shading. So my plan for this series is to keep everything in sort of half an hour, 45-minute videos, but I'm going to release a few of them at once. So I found that with the previous ones, people were waiting a while to actually move on to the next step. So this little section might not take you that long, and you might want to move on to the next step straight away. So I'm going to release sort of 2 or 3 at a time so that you can focus and do a little bit more, and then the following week, doing exactly the same. So we'll be working on small sections, but I'll be releasing them in groups of 2 or 3. It's just I need to record in smaller tutorial parts, otherwise it takes forever to process and upload it for you guys. So that's the plan. So hopefully you've enjoyed this part, and I'll see you straight away in part number 2. Bye.